Hi everyone. In this topic, we're going to take a look at the IB rubrics in more detail. So you've had some practice in using the rubrics to evaluate a piece of student work, a sample from the PRC, and you've compared your interpretations of that to the published scores of the moderators. And so we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into how it is that we work with these rubrics. And some of this may be familiar or your current practice, and some of this I'm going to invite you to think differently about rubrics. So you're going to pull up your subject guide and compare the assessment criteria with the assessment rubrics for the internal assessment. Describe the relationship between them. What you should find is that the assessment criteria are the expected outcomes that students will demonstrate through their performance in the assessment tasks, and the rubrics describe different levels of performance for those criteria. The achievement level descriptors concentrate on positive achievement, although you can see here in this example that 0 is represented, which is the lowest possible level of achievement, so failure to achieve is included in that description. The level descriptors are designed to be used as a whole, and they operate at a global level. It needs to be understood that a few things. The described levels are not a checklist or a necessary minimum. The different levels of performance are not discrete, and differences of degree are involved. Different levels suggest typical performance, and there are always exceptions, requiring individual or case-by-case judgments. The performance of students can be uneven across different aspects of the task, but it's the overall impression that is the most important. So how do we read this? IB task-specific rubrics are designed to support a positive approach to marking, and rubrics are read from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, and that may be laid out a little bit differently than you may have seen before. The purpose of this approach is to give credit to what the work does contain, rather than to penalize it for what it may not contain. So we work from the top of the page to the bottom of the page because in the English language, that's how we read. We read from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. So the rubrics require a best fit approach, and here's how it goes. Initially, assign the work of a level 0. Then we're going to read the descriptor for the next highest descriptor, and evaluate the extent to which there is evidence in the work that matches the descriptor. If the descriptor does match, or if the work does match the descriptor, then we ask, might it match the next highest descriptor? So then we would read the next highest descriptor and evaluate the work against that to see if it matches. If it matches, evaluate the work against the next highest descriptor, and continue until you reach a descriptor that does not describe the work. The correct level to assign the work is the highest one that matches the work. For rubrics that have 2 or 3 levels to one descriptor, as you see in this example here from visual art, if the work is a very good match for the descriptor and may lean toward the next highest, but can't truly be said to be described by it. So in this case, it's a good match for the language in the 4 to 6 range. It's leaning toward this language here, moving from adequate to effective, for example, but it can't truly be described by this. I'm going to stick with this middle band, and I would lean toward the upper number, the 6. If the work is a weak match, but it's better described by this language than the language of the level lower than it, I would match it to the lower level. And if in this case where we've got 3 numbers, if it's a mid-range match, then I would give the mid-range number. We also want to unpack the degrees of difference. So in practice, the rubric at the beginning of this task, in one of the tests you had, you want to look at the difference in language describing one level compared to another level. So here's an example with this one for visual art. Work that demonstrates minimal application to adequate application to effective application. So this is helping us to unpack for the students what's the degree that they're actually going to work toward. One of the ways for that standardization can be so helpful with a colleague is really coming to understand what is the difference between adequate and effective, and then being able to translate that for your students using examples. So on one rubric for your subject area, go through and highlight the words that qualify the performance from one level to the next. In some of the subjects, they also use the command term, so look out for that as well. IB teachers need to spend a lot of time getting comfortable with this. We practice a lot. As I say, we standardize with one another, and we make use of the samples that are on the PRC to help us improve our interpretations of these standards. So as we saw, we can use those samples from the PRC to develop our own practice and as exemplars for students to practice with as well. Best of luck.